Howdy, readers. I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse, and I have a guest with me today. I don't know where he's at on your screen, but this is Juan from Just Juan Reader, and he is a booktuber that I feel like we became friends pretty shortly after I joined BookTube. I don't think I had been on the platform for long at all before we started corresponding in the comments fields on each other's videos. Yeah, so it's been a few years then.
Yeah, I think it's been a few years. With time and now with the pandemic, time has no meaning at all. It's something really weird. It's something that bends and it's very confusing and disorienting. But yeah, I think BookTube. Well, I remember I joined this channel that I have now, Just One Reader, on BookTube. I think it was 2015 or something. But I do think of your channel as one of the earliest ones that I've been sharing and writing in the comments. So yeah, it took us a long time to actually do something like this.
Yeah. Well, and I can't even remember. I started this, so this will be like the latest installment in my page and screening series, and which I started last year with Lukash. We did a video on Ingmar Bergman's The Best Intentions, and and I think because you're a big movie buff. You and I are both huge movie buffs, and so I think my brain, when I was thinking about possible people to have a conversation like this with, you were one of the first people who came to mind, and then we just started talking about, okay, well, what are each of us going to be reading soon? Is there a film adaptation of any of these things? And we just settled on Rebecca, which I think you had read a couple of months ago, right? You had reread a couple of months ago, and then you were like, "Well, I'll be happy to read it yet again for that." So.
That's right. Yeah, I originally read Rebecca maybe like 6 years ago, and I didn't really love it. I liked it, but I thought the pacing was really weird. I think we should talk about the pacing of the novel and all of that later. But I had to read it. Well, I decided to read it again this February. I think I read it January and February because I wrote a paper for my psychoanalytical seminars. And I decided to focus specifically on Rebecca and in Daphne du Maurier overall. And so I had to read Rebecca so carefully. Like, if you could see, this book is underlined. Like, there's notes everywhere. And, I don't usually write on my books and annotate. I never really do it, but here this copy is completely destroyed with my own writing. So I really enjoyed that experience, but it was a very intense, calculated, analytic mode kind of experience, you know what I mean? And then when you said, hey, do you want to read it again? I was like, yeah, I need to read it again like a regular reader would, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. Did you have a chance to revisit the film as well in the lead up to this?
Yeah, I tried to watch the new Netflix one. I bailed. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I think I got to.
I haven't attempted that yet.
Oh no, I mean it's not horrible, but once you have read this novel a few times, once you have seen Hitchcock one, you really can't do it. I think I got to a point where in the movie, in the new one, where they get to Manderley, so very early on in the movie. No, it was so dead. It wasn't even bad. It was just not alive.
That's interesting. A friend of mine, one of my best friends, saw it, and he just thought it was really, really badly acted, which I thought was interesting because even though I haven't seen it, it seems well cast. As I was reading this novel, and this was the first time I'd read Rebecca, I kept thinking, as weird as Armie Hammer has turned out to be, he seems like he seems like Maxim. It seems like a good bit of casting. And Kristen Scott Thomas as well as Mrs. Danvers, I can totally totally buy that. So it's interesting that it's this kind of inert, lifeless badly acted thing. Well, and apparently they did something with the ending. I don't know how they changed the ending, but apparently the ending of the Netflix film is
I think I heard something. Yeah, I think I heard something about the ending as well. I think it's more similar to the actual ending here, in terms of how they represent Maxim. You know, how he actually, spoiler alert, if you're watching this video, I guess, how he actually kills Rebecca more, aggressively with a gun, and he shoots her, which in the Hitchcock one, I think they had to change it because, they couldn't represent Laurence Olivier, like that kind of an actor. They couldn't represent him in such an aggressive way. But yeah, I had to say the Army Hammer, the news about Army Hammer and the whole cannibalism thing. that's just kind of hilarious to me for some reason.
So I'll tell you, I don't usually engage in behavior like this on social media. I don't usually kind of, go trolling on articles, et cetera, et cetera. But I just can't help myself with the whole Army Hammer thing. Every time I see a new article coming across the Hollywood Reporter feed or something like this about it, about how he was, fired from this upcoming film or what have you. I mean, I just can't help myself, and there's just so many puns, there's so many jokes you can make, right? Like I heard that role was really good for sinking your teeth into, or something like that, right? I mean, there's so many things you can say about it, and so it's been a favorite pastime of mine for the last few months, making fun of Army Hammer in the comments fields on Facebook. So yeah, but I suppose you got it coming. If you got fantasies like that,
can you imagine just rewatching Call Me by Your Name, which is one of my favorite movies from recent years, watching that movie Call Me by Your Name and just thinking
yeah,
it's hilarious.
It's wild. It's absolutely crazy.
It is wild.
And I mean, the guy's just clearly he's a strange cat, man. But anyhow, yes, let's talk about Rebecca. Let's talk about this novel. So you wanted to talk about the pacing. And yeah, the first thing that I would say about the pacing, because I agree that the novel's paced very strangely. I felt like for me, the first 100 or 120 pages, it was a real slog. It was difficult for me to get into. And then probably the middle 200 pages of the book, it was really compulsively readable at that point for me. It was difficult to put down. Like I wanted to, constantly pick it up, despite the many problems I was having with the book. And then I felt like the last 100 pages were a slog again. And so it's interesting. Like I've heard people talk about, it's a roller coaster kind of a thing, like it just, you rush through it, but I didn't find that at all. I mean, I found the middle chunk of it like that, I suppose, but I thought the early section was just a real slog, and then the last section, especially that long scene near the end where they're in the room at Manderley, and the asshole cousin shows up drunk, and then they get an inspector in there and they're making all these phone calls. That scene was so poorly staged in the novel. I felt like I was reading a bunch of people playing Clue, right? Playing the board game Clue. And I don't want to read a long section in a book that feels like I'm watching people play Clue. And it just went on and on and on. And I don't know. I was like, let's wrap this shit up, man. Let's figure out what's going on. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, first, I really liked what you said about the many problems that you were having with the novel. I smell controversy here. I want to hear about those problems. But in terms of pacing, I want to say I do agree. The novel is very, very strange in terms of the pacing. It almost feels like haphazard in a way. And I don't know how much of this was deliberate. This was one of her first novels, actually, and it was not very well received at first. Some people really, really loved it, and she received many letters from fans and people who were really, really loving it. But uh, it was not very well reviewed critically. And yeah, it's a strange novel in terms of the structure and how, I don't know if this was a deliberate choice to structure it this way, or it was just the way that it came out. But yeah, I both all three times that I've read the novel, I've had the same issue. And because I've reread it, now I know how I need to approach this novel. So I know that the part where they are in Monte Carlo at the beginning, I need to read that quickly, and I need to get to Manderley and then really enjoy it. And then the ending again is very, very strange. I also feel the same way that you did. Um, so yeah, so one of the psychoanalytical readings of this novel and the structure and the form of the novel, from, in my opinion, is the novel is sort of very seductive, right? It's very enticing. It's seductive. It sort of pulls you in and then like draws you in. And even the way that it's constructed, sentence by sentence, and the words that she chose, especially in the prologue, it's very, very seductive. You can really see the trees surrounding Manderley, and it comes alive and it pulls you in with its long fingers and tendrils. So one of my psychoanalytical readings of the pacing of the novel is that it's very much a constant interplay of tension, like a sexual kind of tension, like a preamble, and then orgasmic release. And then it goes back again into, this kind of tension and release, tension and release. And even the ending, I don't know how you felt about the ending. I would love to hear about that, because the final scene, they are driving to Manderley and they see what they see. What do you feel about that scene, that ending?
Um, so my first thought, I mean, as I'm reading that, and it's interesting, right? Because I had seen the Hitchcock film in the past. It's one of my favorite movies, but I hadn't seen it in so long. I didn't remember how it ended, so it was a surprise for me as they see this kind of glow in the sky. And my first thought was, God, man, Mrs. Danvers is a bitch. That woman is just crazy and evil. So that was my first thought. But I do find it interesting. So I don't know. I think the novel would have been stronger. Okay, so there's my edition of this comes with like an original epilogue that she had written, and I got the impression that not all copies of Rebecca have that, and I felt so. I read the epilogue, and I felt like the book would have been stronger without the epilogue. I wish I hadn't read it. I think that the novel would have been stronger if it had just ended with their approach, right? And their epiphany that Manderley is burning, et cetera, which is how Hitchcock ends it. Although it's interesting. So in the Hitchcock film, it's not Maxim's wife who's traveling with him. It's Frank. And she has gone ahead. So she's at Manderley when it's burning. So the ending of the film, I feel like it's actually a hell of a lot darker. Because it ends right there as they're approaching, and we know that she's likely going to be dead, et cetera, and so I feel like that the ending of the film is much more in keeping with the kind of tone of the novel, because that epilogue, where we have Maxim, it's years later, and Maxim and his wife are kind of just traveling around Europe. He's, I think, using a wheelchair now because he was presumably injured in fighting the fire. It talks about how Manderley has been repurposed as a country club and this, that, and the other thing. And it just didn't work for me. That epilogue didn't work for me at all. I thought the approach to Manderley and seeing
what is the epilogue?
The fire reflected in the sky was just a beautiful way to end the book. But
I didn't even know about the epilogue. I've always read, I've read different copies of the book, but never with the epilogue. It just sort of ends. Chapter 27. And the ashes blew towards us with the salt wind from the sea. Which is a beautiful ending. It's an ending that I love. I love it because it comes back to this kind of tension and weird suspense, I guess. But I did like the Hitchcock ending because it was sort of very intense and dramatic, and those kinds of scenes. And I really want to talk about Mrs. Danvers in the film because I love that character and the
Yeah.
portrayal from the actress. But I really love that scene, the ending of the movie, the Hitchcock one. It just makes me think of Mexican telenovelas, soap operas. It's your typical villain, scene at the ending, I remember like everything's coming down on her and there's fire and it's
Yeah.
so weird.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, the ending of the film is just it's just glorious. And yeah, I think you're right. The woman who plays Danvers in the movie is just wonderful. And I don't know who it is off the top of my head. I can't think of anything else I've seen with her in it. But she was, and I looked it up last night. She was nominated for the Oscar for it. She didn't win. The film bizarrely won Best Picture and Best Cinematography, and that's it. Right? I mean, it's functionally just won the top award and nothing else, which is pretty wild. And one of the things about the movie that I always find really interesting is people tend to, at least from what I've read in the past and conversations I've had, people tend to think of it more as a Selznick production rather than a Hitchcock film, because it doesn't really have, like, Hitchcock hadn't come into kind of full bloom yet as an auteur, as somebody whose sensibility was just really, really honed and really sharpened. And I feel like Rebecca is kind of right. I mean, he made a hell of a lot of movies before Rebecca, but I feel like Rebecca is right kind of at the beginning of Hitchcock kind of figuring himself out as an artist. And and apparently he's in it as well. He's in most of his films. He's got these little cameos. And he plays like a person next to a phone booth, but I can't remember him. I can't remember a phone booth scene in the film, but even though I just watched it. So
yeah, but that's interesting because even the opening of the film really has this kind of grand feeling with the music and the titles, and I don't remember the music exactly, the melody, but it has this kind of sweeping thing. Like it made me think of Gone with the Wind. Of course, it's a David, what is it? Oh, Selznick?
Yeah, Selznick, yeah.
Production, yeah. So it has that kind of feel. Oh, Gone with the Wind. That's another great movie and a great book and a great adaptation. Yeah. Anyway,
I've never read Gone with the Wind.
So
you can believe that. I've never read it.
Yeah,
I've never read it. I love the film. And I may read Gone with the Wind, like for March of the Mammoths at some point in the future.
Oh, you're gonna love it.
I do really want to read it, especially just I feel like it's a book and a film that really need defending these days for obvious reasons. There's so many people going after Gone with the Wind these days, and loving the film as much as I do, I should probably read the novel just so I can really kind of come at that defense. With I don't know, I guess all guns blazing, as it were. But yeah, Kelly and I saw Gone with the Wind on the big screen. I think it was like right at the end of 2019. So a few months before the world went to hell in a handbasket, and it was amazing on the big screen. I had never seen it on the big screen before. Yeah, it was kind of overwhelming. So
it sounds like a movie that you want to see in the biggest screen with the best audio system ever.
Yeah.
Did I tell you? I mean, this is kind of a weird tangent, but I think I did tell you the first movie that I saw after the first big lockdown, when movie theaters opened here in Mexico. I have a very convenient movie theater here. It's very, very nice and it's completely empty. And I was the only person there when they opened. And I think I did tell you the movie that I saw was Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Oh,
yeah, you did. Which is amazing.
Fucking amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And what a welcome. What a way to come back to the theater.
Yeah, that was the best. That was my favorite film of 2019. And it came out right at the tail end of 2019. And the movie just blows my mind. I've still only seen it the once. Lukash actually rewatched it here recently, and he said that as much as he loved it the first time, he said he loved it even more the second time. So that has me pretty excited to watch it. And Kelly hasn't seen it yet, so next time I watch it, it'll be her first time watching it. But yeah. So before I get into some of the shit in the novel that I really hated, like really, really hated.
Oh, yes.
You know, so we talked about how the ending of Hitchcock's film is darker because it puts Frank in the car with Maxim rather than Mrs. De Winter in the car with Maxim, right? So she's at Manderley. She's imperiled at that point. But one of the things that I loved about the film as well is that it introduces Maxim in a very different way than the novel does. So the first time we see Maxim in the film, he looks to be contemplating suicide, standing there on the edge of a cliff, and she cries out to him and stops him. So I love that the film actually opens, well, not opens, but we're introduced to the characters in a way that feels menacing. Whereas in the novel, it's over lunch and her obnoxious employer is there, and so again, right? Like I feel like one of the jobs of a filmmaker in adapting a book is to be able to identify kind of the beating heart of the thing, the tone of the novel, and to somehow kind of replicate or translate that tone onto the screen. And I feel like Hitchcock did such a great job of that, a better job even than she did in writing the novel, right? I mean, it's this gothic, spooky, creepy thing. It's very romantic in many ways, and but again, like the characters, when they first meet each other, there's nothing kind of creepy or spooky or sexy about it at all. And and I love that Hitchcock said, okay, let's begin their relationship with each other the first time they see each other, the first time they meet, with this sense of kind of being on a precipice. There's a sense of threat or risk involved, which there isn't in the novel.
I think what you say makes a lot of sense. I think because they're both different things, different media. Of course, you're going to see different layers of the characters, the way that they are introduced and the way that they develop. I think you're right. In terms of the novel, I think what she was trying to do, and we can discuss if this was successful, but I think what she's trying to do is present a character who is quote unquote, traditionally phallic, very like a man's man, of the time, a very stern, cool, sort of grandiose kind of man, but sort of haunted by something that we can't really understand at first. But we do see this kind of lord kind of character. And yeah, I think in the movie, we just, at the beginning of when we are introduced to this character, we don't see that kind of exterior or that facade. We see more layers from the get-go. And in the book, I feel like there's maybe more of a slower evolution, like the appealing of layers of the onion that is Maxim. I think it's more gradual in the novel when we get to Manderley and we start to, when she, the protagonist who doesn't have a name, she starts to feel unsettled. And I think that's a very important thing in this novel, that feeling of unsettlement. Is that a word? Unsettlement?
It is now.
Is that a word?
It is.
I don't know. I
now.
mean, I'm in Mexico City. I shouldn't be even thinking of this right now. And it's early and I've only had 2 cups of coffee. So I don't know if I'm speaking right or wrong. But anyway, so yeah, this feeling of being unsettled and trying to understand what is going on with this man who just keeps on getting darker and more evil by each chapter. So yeah, I think you're right in that the novel does something completely different. And I think Hitchcock was intent on making sure that the viewer really saw more layers of Maxim at first, right?
Yeah, it feels, the presentation of him at the beginning, standing there on the edge of that cliff. There's something about it. So in the novel, I feel like, when we see them having lunch together, he's taking her for drives, et cetera, et cetera. The novel seems much more interested in painting him in a kind of, like you use the word phallic, right? Like this kind of debonair, romantic light. Whereas, in the film, seeing him presumably contemplating suicide for from the get-go, he becomes much more a character, much more a figure of mystery, initially from right out of the gate in the film, and I love that about it, right? I love that that Hitchcock almost seems to be presenting Maxim in the performance of Laurence Olivier as almost kind of incidentally romantic or incidentally debonair, right? So his being a mysterious figure is the most important thing, I think, to both Olivier and Hitchcock. Whereas in the novel, yeah, like I don't know, it seems flip-flopped, right? It seems like in the novel he's, the mystery surrounding him is the incidental thing, right? So there's much more of a focus on him being lord of the manor and living on this huge estate, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas in the film, it's much more, I think, the mystery is the focus, which is cool to me. Yeah. So one of the reasons why I think the film works so well is because it doesn't have Daphne du Maurier's prose in it. I think she's a great writer of dialogue, and she's a great writer of mood. But man, so this novel, that first 100 pages, this may be the only novel I've ever read that I could think of where I feel like a lot of the prose is what we call purple, right? And with purple prose, so a lot of my favorite writers write purple prose, right? Peter Carey tends to write purple prose, et cetera, et cetera. And I love, the thing I love about purple prose is just the minutia, right? Like all of the detail, like being kind of overwhelmed or, feeling like the book is crammed with detail. I love that. And there's so many fucking words. And I feel like often she is saying nothing. It's like it manages to be purple and thin at the same time. Like there's one page of this book that, let's see if did I mark it? That pissed me off so bad because she communicates nothing. I mean, she communicates absolutely. Yeah, so it's the first page of chapter 6. And there are so many words in these paragraphs, and she's not saying anything. And I just want to get to the damn point, woman. Like, get to the point. And especially this second paragraph. So the first paragraph's fine, I suppose. It's just kind of cataloging all this stuff, sort of leaving, getting ready to go. But that second paragraph, I'm just going to read some of it here, okay? This house sheltered us. We spoke, we loved within those walls. That was yesterday. Today we pass on, we see it no more, and we are different, changed in some infinitesimal way. We can never be quite the same again. Even stopping for luncheon at a wayside inn and going to a dark, unfamiliar room to wash my hands, the handle of the door unknown to me, the wallpaper peeling in strips. Oh, your picture, we've lost visual on you. Oh, you're back.
Yeah.
A funny little cracked mirror above the basin. For this moment, it is mine. It belongs to me. We know one another. This is the present. There is no past and no future. Here I am washing my hands, and the cracked mirror shows me to myself, suspended as it were in time. This is me. This moment will not pass. It's like, good, how many, and she does this all throughout the book. She says the same fucking thing twice in a row, and all throughout the book. Like the book would be, I don't know, it'd be 30%. It'd be 300 pages rather than 400 pages if she just said, "All right, I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and it'll be good." But no, right? She just does this constantly, right? We see no more, and we are different, changed in some infinitesimal way, right? So we're different twice. She's saying it two different ways right there. Then the next sentence, we can never be quite the same again. I got it. Like, I got it. You're different. You're all different. And she gets worse about it actually at the end.
Yeah, I agree.
Toward the end of the book, it's less flowery when she does it, like we see there. But why? I just don't know. It's almost like it's like this little tick that she has, that she feels the need to repeat things in the sentence, and it was driving me insane by the end of the book, just insane.
Yeah, I agree. I think no one, I think, can argue or disagree with the fact that this novel has some purple prose and that it drags sometimes. The weird pacing has a lot to do with that, and the writing. Even though I love her writing, and that's why as an author I keep coming for works, is because of the writing style. Writing style for me is number one. That's the most important. Then character, and then plot. And I really, really love reading her words, but after having read some of her more polished, I think is the word, works, going back to Rebecca, you can really see the unpolished writing. You can really see the repetition that you mentioned that really creates this kind of wave, like an ocean wave of words that it feels very atmospheric. And I do think that it gives the book that kind of ethereal sort of atmosphere, because this is all a memory. This is all a flashback. So the entire novel, because it's a flashback, it's a recollection of something that she's thinking about in the future. I think I'm going to try to defend du Maurier here. I think she was trying to come up with ways, somewhat artificial and very technical, writerly, I'm making up words, writerly ways to really craft this kind of like ethereal memory flashback kind of thing. And it feels to me that's how it should feel like. But I do agree that it's a little bit too much, especially towards the ending. I don't have a problem with the beginning of the book and chapter 6 being so repetitive, because I think it serves that purpose of like a memory, and it feels like a weird lullaby in a way, even though it can be annoying, especially when you really want to see what the story's about.
Yeah.
But I cannot forgive her of that in the ending, because in the ending of this kind of book, which is a mystery gothic kind of thing, you really want things to wrap up, and I think she really lost the rhythm there towards the ending.
It's a really good point. I hadn't thought about how this kind of flowery tendency of hers, at the outset, is partly responsible for the casting of the spell, you might say, at the beginning of that. I hadn't thought about that. So that's a very good point. And also, that's probably why the repetition started really bothering me toward the end, because, the plot at that point has become a kind of engine, man. It's really propulsive, and you really do want to find out what's going to happen. And yet with this authorly tick of hers, it just gets under your skin. You're like, get to the fucking point, man. Like, what's the resolution? Like, who's this doctor? What's going on? And the whole doctor thing, I feel like there was a tiny bit of a red herring, because so we don't know very much at all about the narrator's past, about her childhood and her being an orphan and stuff. We don't know much at all about that. And then there's a moment where they've got Rebecca's planner there, and they're trying to figure out who's this doctor, and the narrator all of a sudden lets us know as readers that she knows who the doctor, that she knows, and it seems really ominous. It seems like, oh man, Maxim is fucked. Like I don't know what's going to happen, but she seems to know what's going to happen. And then when they meet up with the doctor, and it turns out that she had cancer or something like this. I was totally thinking, once we got a sense that the narrator knew who the doctor was, I was like, oh shit, must be from, when she was a teenager, and she knew somebody who he's probably an abortionist or something, and so I was fully expecting it to go in that direction. But it's like the fact that he was a regular doctor and he identified cancer, like why would the narrator A know that, and B, why would it be this have this kind of this looming impending threat, right? Like oh my God, like Maxim is screwed now, because that's not the case, right? I mean, when they get there and the whole thing, it felt really anticlimactic to me, the thing with the doctor, but yeah, I don't know. Part of the problem with this might be, like, so I asked you last night how much you knew about the plagiarism case against Rebecca, and if in fact she plagiarized the plot of this thing, the fault might not lie with her, right? It'd be her fault for plagiarizing. And that old New York Times article that I shared with you, that I think was written in like 1941 or 1943, something like that, that looked at the plagiarism case. I feel like there's a lot of fire there. I don't feel like it's just smoke. I feel like there's a lot of fire there, no pun intended, right, with the ending of the book. But yeah, it seems to me that she may have plagiarized this. And what's interesting is in the author's notes, right, which was in my edition, the author's note was written 40 years later. She mentions a plagiarism case that had no standing and was thrown out of court, but it is not the plagiarism case. So it was she says, then some years later, a suit for plagiarism was brought against Selznick International Pictures by the family of a Mrs. McDonald, I trust I have the name right, who said the story was a copy of a novel she had written called Blind Windows. I had never heard of Mrs. McDonald or her Blind Windows. The novel was sent to me and I glanced through it. It was nothing like my Rebecca, save for the fact that the man in the book had been married twice. The suit was brought and I was called as a witness for the defense, right? So it was thrown out of court. And I found her author's note really intellectually dishonest, because she does not mention the plagiarism case that actually has merit. She only mentions the one, where the standing, where the case itself had really no grounds, right? It's nothing for a character to have been married twice in the book. But the successor, written by I think she was Brazilian. I mean, that sounds like. It sounds like Rebecca front to back. Like, I mean, it sounds like the plot in Rebecca is basically identical. And even some of the passages in that New York Times piece, some of the passages that are quoted from the successor and then from Rebecca. When I was a teacher, man, if somebody had turned in Rebecca and somebody had brought to my attention these other passages from the successor, I would have busted Daphne du Maurier for plagiarism. That would have been convincing enough for me as a teacher. And so yeah, I don't know, right? So maybe like the mechanics of the plot, some of the mechanics of the plot that I have a problem with, if she did in fact lift that stuff from another book, that would be on the writer of the original book, I suppose, to some extent.
I hadn't really given much thought to the plagiarism thing. I'm trying to see. I have the biography here by Margaret Forster, and I do remember when I read this a few months ago, there was mention of the plagiarism case and everything, but it sort of, I think it dismisses that. I don't think the biographer really went into it that much. Maybe I just don't remember. But I don't know. Maybe you have cracked the du Maurier case. Who knows?
No, I mean,
this is like a Da Vinci Code, the du Maurier code. That would be good.
Well,
I don't know. I mean, my only problem here is that really worth plagiarizing? Like, is that really that special? I don't know. It might be. It just
so the thing is, and I don't remember all the details exactly, but so the woman the Brazilian woman who had written this book, The Successor, she translated her own book into English. She sent it to a publisher in England, or maybe it was America, I can't remember, to try to get it published there. I think was unable to get it published there. And it turned out to be Daphne du Maurier's publisher, okay, or editor or something like that. So essentially there was a person in common. And you just get the sense that this Brazilian novel, the translation of this Brazilian novel, found its way to this publishing house. They decided not to publish it. And then somebody at the publishing house passed it on to Daphne du Maurier and said, this is a great idea. We didn't publish it, but you should write something like this. And so essentially kind of gives her the story. And the fact that Daphne du Maurier wrote Rebecca in such a short span of time as well is a little bit damning, taking that into consideration with the possibility of it being plagiarized. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you might be right. I think this is a very interesting discussion. I don't know if we'll really get somewhere with it, but coming back to your point of this character, the doctor, and the whole that sequence, and the way that she structures the novel towards the ending and puts that scene there. To me, I guess I was reading it from a different point of view, trying to think psychoanalytically about it. And I think what she manages to do with that scene and with the whole cancer plot twist is making Rebecca the ultimate narcissistic character. She's a woman who provokes and seduces everyone. Not provokes, seduces everyone. Everyone is seduced by her, both male and female. Maxim, Mrs. Danvers, of course, even the protagonist. Rebecca is the ultimate narcissist in the way that she seduces everyone. She's the cause of temptation. She's like from the one ring from the Lord of the Rings. She's the object of desire and temptation, and everyone is elves and men and wizards, and everyone is drawn to that object. And I think that's kind of the purpose of Rebecca in the novel, of course. And the whole thing with the cancer plot twist, I think, is sort of painting this image of a woman who was so fragile in her own self-esteem and narcissism that she had to manipulate Maxim to kill her, because she would never kill herself. She was afraid. She knew she would die. But, the best option was that kind of horrifying death. So yeah, I don't know if it was done successfully, but I think that's the point to me.
I'm really struck by the idea of the cancer being a physical manifestation of just how toxic she was as a person, right? So this malignancy within her is a kind of, I don't know, is a kind of bodying forth, is a kind of summoning up of just how horrible she was as a human being. And speaking of how awful she was, when you're talking about her being a seducer. So obviously when you're reading Rebecca, the classic novel that comes to mind when you're reading Rebecca is Jane Eyre. Like, there are so many parallels between Jane Eyre and Rebecca, it's not even funny. But the scene in the novel, right, and thinking about Rebecca as a kind of seductress, like you're saying, the scene in the novel where Mrs. Danvers tells the narrator about her relationship with Rebecca and how she kind of raised her and this, that, and the other thing. It reminded me a lot of Great Expectations. And I started thinking of Mrs. Danvers as being like Miss Havisham, raising Estella and essentially kind of training Estella to be a manipulator of men, to be this object of desire who is incapable, or who is capable of inflicting the most extreme cruelty on men. And I thought that was really fascinating as well, to think about where Rebecca kind of stands Blue just came in the room. He's over there trying to get in the closet. Sorry. So to think about where Rebecca as a book stands in relation to, you know, these great novels that came before it, right? It's very much in conversation with Great Expectations and with Jane Eyre. But this idea, I love that you compared Rebecca to the One Ring, right? Because in the novel and in the film as well, right? Like we have Maximus constantly saying, after everything is fallen apart and they find the boat, and he's like, she's won, like Rebecca has won, like she still has agency in the world, right? That she's this kind of ghost somehow who is still pulling all the strings. And she is like the One Ring in that way, right? That even not so much like it's not even like having it, right? Like when it's around your neck, it's like, oh, it's weighing you down and all this jazz, it's affecting your behavior. But just the fact that it exists in the world, people dream about it and they want it, right? She seems to be this kind of dark star who has all of these men in this orbit around her, and not just the men, right? But Mrs. Danvers, right? Like Rebecca is Mrs. Danvers' reason for existing. Really, I mean, and even after she dies, the fact that she curates, it's like she's turned her fucking room into a museum or something. You know, it's so creepy. But yeah, I think that if Rebecca is taken out of the equation, if her agency is removed, if she no longer has power over other people, I think that's why Mrs. Danvers burns the whole place down. She can't handle that. She can't handle Rebecca not being in control of the situation anymore. And yeah.
I think Rebecca is a representation of desire, because she's not even a character in the book. We never see her. We never really get to even. I don't think we get a visual of her, of what she looked like, we see her in her representations. Like, for example, a great scene, one of my favorite scenes from the movie is when Mrs. Danvers takes the protagonist to Rebecca's room and shows her, all of her night clothes. I don't know how you call that. What is that, lingerie? And
well, she says all of her underwear. She pulls the
her underwear, out. Right?
Yeah,
her underwear and everything. That's such a great scene. You can really feel the temptation, the kind of seduction, but it's tinged with fear and temptation. So that made me think of the One Ring. And yeah, I think if we say that Rebecca is like the ring in terms of how it represents desire, and how, desire is this thing that doesn't really exist, except it moves you, it moves everyone and puts everyone around her. I don't know if I'm explaining this right, and Mrs. Danvers, I think, who would she be? Would she be like a Gollum kind of character?
I don't know. In Lord of the Rings, I suppose so, because Gollum is like the steward of the ring, right? For all that time, and it twists him, and so she's kind of the steward of Rebecca, right? She raises her up, right? She's constantly trying to protect her, and but again, like Rebecca twists Mrs. Danvers in the same way that Estella, right, as Miss Havisham's project in Great Expectations, twists Miss Havisham into something that's almost other than human, right? She becomes a kind of wraith or a kind of monster. She's so eaten up by this kind of this toxicity that these characters, Gollum and Miss Havisham and Mrs. Danvers, they all kind of cease to be human, right? There's something so menacing and so threatening about Mrs. Danvers, and it's so obvious, and it's even so obvious to the narrator, which actually made it really difficult for me to believe that the narrator would have taken her suggestion to dress up in that gown, right? To have that gown made, right? I mean, the narrator's got to know that Mrs. Danvers has some ulterior motive. I mean, she's been this horrendous bitch through the whole book, she's been cruel and manipulating and conniving the whole time, and the narrator sees that, but yet she just blindly accepts that. Oh, she's she's told me about this idea for a costume. Oh, that sounds like a good idea. Like, no, I didn't buy that the narrator would take Mrs. Danvers' advice, because she recognizes that Mrs. Danvers is a monster, and it has nothing but ill will toward the narrator. Nothing at all toward her but ill will.
That's actually my favorite scene from the book. Excuse me. That's my favorite scene from the book. The thing with the gown and the stairs, and she's coming down to this party. I just love that scene. Every single time that I've read the book, that's my favorite scene in the book, because it's. I think there, Daphne du Maurier really writes suspense really well. You can really feel the tension, because as a reader, you're supposed to know what she's not. What she doesn't know, what she's not seeing, which is what you just said, that Mrs. Danvers is clearly a bitch, and she's setting her up, and she wants to see the protagonist humiliated and ashamed, and she's always ashamed, but she wants to see her destroyed. Yeah. And we as readers, we know that it's so evident, but she's so incredibly idiotically naive. She's the ultimate ingenue, and she's like, she really believes that this is going to work out well for her. And every single time that I read that scene, that's the highlight of the book for me. And I think the movie captures some of that, but I personally prefer the book in that regard. And something else that I wanted to say, I agree. And something else that I wanted to say regarding that toxicity coming from Rebecca and the cancer, I think also the way that femininity is presented and portrayed in this novel is very interesting, because we see very polarizing models of what a woman is, or what a woman can be or should be, or what that means. We have Rebecca, which is a very clear representation of femininity, and then we have, on the other really opposite side, we have the protagonist, who is the complete opposite. And
very innocent.
And the cancer thing, I think, is also trying to represent how Daphne du Maurier as a person really felt very ambivalently towards her own femininity. And she presents the cancer is not just any kind of cancer; it's ovarian cancer, I believe, something that is completely linked to her womanhood, to her femininity, and the way that she represents that. I think that's interesting, because Daphne du Maurier, from a very early age, had a lot of problems not with her identity, because she knew who she was, and she identified as a female. But she was never quite content with that, and she sort of had fantasies, and she played a lot of games where she was a boy and she wanted to dress up as a boy. And even in her adult life, she had a very clear but latent homosexual tendency, and she had these like very strong relationships with women that were very seductive, and very she was filled with admiration of certain women. There was I think, an idealization of certain women. And I think Rebecca was very interesting for me to read psychoanalytically because of all of these representations of femininity. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. I didn't know that about her, but I do like the idea of thinking about an author working through her own understanding of what a woman can be, because you're right. I mean, all of the women in this book are completely different. Even if take into consideration like the minor characters, right? The narrator's employer at the beginning, I can't even remember the name of that character, but there's something so kind of dowdy and smug about her. And she's completely different from Mrs. Danvers and from Rebecca and from the narrator. all of the women in the book are radically different from each other. And so I do really like that idea of an author working through her own understanding of femininity through the characters. That's a really cool idea. Yeah.
So what else should we talk about? Do you have a particular scene or passage or problem
No,
with the book,
I mean,
with the movie?
there are lines, there are sentences in the book that are some of the worst sentences I've ever read. There's one in particular that I'm like, oh my God, this is so bad. But no, I mean, I don't think so. There are more things I think about the film that are really interesting. I love how Hitchcock uses Manderley to make the narrator, to make the main character seem even smaller and more cowed. The majesty of the place makes her seem more mousy than she might have otherwise. Even the scene in the film when I think it's when Mrs. Danvers comes in and talks to her for the first time about the menu, and she's sitting in at what had been Rebecca's desk in her chair, and when Mrs. Danvers leaves, Joan Fontaine, the actress, very obviously, I mean, you can see it. She actually shrinks into herself. She kind of shrinks into the chair. She feels so diminished by Mrs. Danvers and by the place itself. And I love that Hitchcock made that very clear, because that's a very difficult thing to do on the page, is to give us a sense of how small she feels in comparison with the environment. So that was something I thought was very cool. One of the things that drove me nuts in the book, God, it just drove me fucking crazy. So when they find her body locked up in the boat on the bottom of the seabed, I was just like, oh, Maxim is fucked, man, because they're gonna think that she drowned, but they're gonna see that, you know, like her skeleton had been shattered in some spot by a bullet. But then Maxim's like, no, the bullet passed cleanly through her, it didn't touch bone. And I was like, what is this, like the magic bullet from JFK or something? Right? I mean, there's no way a bullet is going to pass through a body without leaving any mark on a bone. That's just, I mean, I don't know very much about ballistics or anything, but that seems impossible to me. So I thought, and again, it's just like, if that's so ridiculous, which in my eyes it is, why didn't she just fucking rewrite that? Have him kill her in some other way? You know, like instead of having the magic bullet, you know, that Kevin Costner's talking about at the end of JFK, that, like, you know, traveling through the air and doing U-turns and going into this bone and out that bone, and it's pristine at the end. It had to have been the magic bullet that Maxim killed her with. But anyway, so that drove me crazy. But you know, I did like the book. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. Part of me wanted to give it 2 stars, but it is really compulsively readable. You know, it is a good story, and I love I love Jane Eyre, man. I love Jane Eyre, and this book, you know, the echoes of Jane Eyre in this, right, on down to Manderley being like Thornfield, and you know, the ghost of Rebecca, and the burning of the place at the end, right? So he's got this previous wife who there's some secret about, this shame involved with it. It feels very much almost like a kind of a reinvention of Jane Eyre. So that was one of the most interesting things about it for me, because I love Charlotte Bronte's novel so much. But yeah, man, there's just some of the prose in this is absolutely god awful, and very, very little of the prose in this, in my opinion, is, you know, so I keep a commonplace book. I actually keep a journal of my favorite quotes, my favorite lines, and there is nothing in these 400 pages that even for a moment I thought, oh, you know, I should keep that. I should save that in my commonplace book. And that's unfortunate. You know, when I read a 400-page classic, there should be something in it that I want to save, and there wasn't anything in this that I wanted to save. I really feel like Hitchcock's film is a better work of art than du Maurier's novel. Yeah, yeah,
I think that's a fair assessment of this novel. And, even though I love the Du Maurier books that I've read so far, and I really like her writing, um, I think that's a fair assessment to say that Hitchcock's take on this story is a much better rounded thing. It's just artistically, it's tighter, it's more beautiful, it's more successful, it's more there's yeah, it's just better. It's just better. But I will say that I think what this novel manages to do, and I think that's why she received all of the praise that she did, and that's why she became so famous and such a best-selling author in her day, is because even in this novel, which has many problems in the writing, what readers were able to see was a sense of atmosphere. And I
yeah.
really, really
She's great
believe
at that.
that's why she's a great, great uh, I was going to say craftswoman of atmosphere. I think she
Yeah,
uses language in a way that you might find it infuriating, or you might find it slow, or whatever, and that's valid. But I think she manages to create a very specific tone and an atmosphere. And like I said, I, Juan, consider myself a reader of writing, and I think the writing in this book actually made me think of another Bronte novel, which is my favorite Bronte, Wuthering Heights. Um, I like Jane Eyre. I don't love it, but I've only read it once. I will probably have to reread it sometime soon. But I love Wuthering Heights because the writing is absolutely pristine and gorgeous, and it just oozes this kind of vile that is sort of romantic but incredibly evil at the same
yeah.
time. And many people actually have reacted in similar ways to both Rebecca and to Wuthering Heights. Many people have mistaken these books for romantic, like romance novels, love stories. And both of them, I mean, they have romantic atmospheres and romantic language, perhaps, but they are really gothic tales, cautionary tales, I would say, of seduction and evil and ruin. And they are very tragic.
Yeah.
They are tragedies. And I think they have been mistaken for the same reasons. And I love them for the same reasons. But I will give you that point, my friend, that the writing in Rebecca in particular is very it just doesn't come together. There are moments that are lovely to read and, as you said, compulsively readable, and sometimes you're just like, please take life. I mean, just come on, just do
Yeah.
something. And I think
Well,
that's why
there.
I would recommend that you continue something by Du Maurier, read something else, because she keeps crafting her writing later on.
So early in the book, okay, and I was having problems with the prose early, because when she gives us concrete details to build atmosphere, it works. When she talks about the flowers, like the big heads with those giant, and they're like funereal, right? There's something funereal about flowers. That works. It's beautiful. But in this edition on page 7, right, so just barely into chapter 2, she'll give us a line like this, right? So it says here, color and scent and sound, rain and the lapping of water, even the mists of autumn and the smell of the flood tide. These are memories of Manderley that will not be denied. Okay, why begin that sentence with something as pallid and pointless as color and scent and sound? Like that is it's just, well, like, why even put that there? Like, you don't remember. It's like, I don't say, oh, I have such fond memories of color. I have such fond memories of scent. Like, it's so general, and it's just hideous. And the fact that she follows that up with concrete, lovely examples. Why even give us those words? She's not remembering color. She's not remembering sound. She's remembering specific colors and specific sounds and specific images. Just give us the fucking images. Like, don't set it up with these words that mean nothing. And she'll do this periodically through the book. And it's just, I just don't understand. Like, what she needs to do in the book, and she fails to do often, is she needs to just dial in on specifically, because you're right, she's really good at building atmosphere, but man, she could have been so much better if she had just dialed it in more. And so I think the greatest travesty of this thing is not so much the writing, but the editing. Her editor should have said, listen, you need to tighten this shit up, right? You got a good story here. You've got some beautiful writing here in places, but it's just bloated, like you just need to tighten it up. And so it almost feels like it wasn't even edited to me. Like some of the there are sentences in this that don't even make any fucking sense. Like I read the sentence 3 or 4 times, and it literally doesn't make any sense as written. And an editor should have caught that. An editor should have said, "What are you trying to say here?" Because if it's not clear to me, it's not going to be clear to your average reader. But anyway,
yeah. I think the editor or the editing process of this particular novel would be very interesting to know more about. So I was going through her biography here. In chapter 9, they are talking about how I think it's the editor, or is it publisher? I don't know. Victor Golanx. I don't know how you pronounce that name.
Golanx. Yeah,
that's a publisher. Well, the publisher had a very, very particular reaction to the manuscript of Rebecca. And it says here that this man said, Golanx, whatever, said, this novel had a most unusual quality. So again, the atmosphere, the tone, the quality. He said it was a sentimental novel, but not in a haunting, melancholy way, but in a haunting, melancholy way that captured the reader's attention and sympathy from the very first paragraph. But it was also passionate, not that there is any sign of physical passion, and though melodramatic, brilliantly creates a sense of atmosphere and suspense. So we might be able to think of the possibility that even the editing and publishing process of Rebecca was tinged with the seduction of her writing, and maybe they weren't able to really craft it and make it even better, make it tighter, dial it in, as you said. Maybe they were overwhelmed by the whiff of those scents and the dazzling quality of those colors that can detract from the novel.
I think it's definitely true. That even just average readers, I think sometimes when I see somebody praising a book that I've read and I think is just awful, I think sometimes readers can be, to use the word seduced again, seduced by the mood of something, or seduced by the plot, or maybe they fall in love with a character in the book, and so it becomes more difficult for them to recognize the flaws in the novel. And so I suppose an editor could be guilty of that as well, right? Just falling under the spell of something to a degree that their critical faculties are somehow diminished or blunted a little bit. So that's definitely a possibility, and I could see that happening with something like this, especially once you get into the book, once you get into the meat of the story. It is very moody and very kind of addictive. Notice how I say addictive. I fucking hate when people say addicting, man. I just say addicting is not a word. It is not a word, but it's become the most common usage of people don't say addictive anymore. They don't. They say addicting, and it drives me crazy. So anyway, that was a tangent that had no meaning.
But I wanted to ask you something. That was actually my first question that I wrote here on my iPhone, preparing for this Zoom meeting. I wanted to ask you, it's a very basic question, but I think it's really interesting. Why do you think that this novel, Rebecca, in particular, from her entire body of work, it's this novel, Rebecca, this is a fucking rock star. I mean, have you seen how much people love this book? I love it, but yeah. I have my problems with it, or I can discuss the piece without idealizing it. But this is everywhere. And I don't know if it has to do with BookTube and YouTube, which have maybe made me more aware of what people are reading and what people's reading tastes are like nowadays. But people really, really love this shit.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. This is a novel that, you know, the people who love it tend to really, really love it and feel very protective of it. And you know, and I knew when I was reading it, I was like, oh man, I'm going to have really harsh things to say about the prose in this, that there are going to be people really pissed about that. But, you know, I think it has, well, it's a little bit like with Wuthering Heights, the same kind of thing. The people who love that book, you know, there are certain kinds of books I think that there's no sort of middle ground on, for the most part. You know, there are books that people really, really love, or they really, really hate. And this seems to be one of those books. And it's just that most people who read it really, really love it. But I think that, you know, there's just something sort of swoony about it, about the atmosphere. And like you said, I mean, it's a very sinister work, but it's so good at kind of weaving this spell and, you know, intoxicating us as readers with the atmosphere, that we tend to forget just how sinister it is. Even, God almighty, even when Maxim confesses to her what he's done to Rebecca, most women would be like, whoa, you're telling me that you murdered your first wife? And she's just falls even more under his spell. She loves him all the more for learning that he's a murderer. You know, and I think that, you know, I think that women who really love this book and love the character of Maxim, yeah, it's like it papers over all flaws. You know, the veneer of this thing is such that it just makes people, it makes it easy to fall in love with it, right? The veneer of it, the mood, this whole kind of gothic thing about it. You know, I think that explains to, in large part, like people's love of Wuthering Heights and people's love of Jane Eyre, because people love the Bronte novels in ways that are very different from how people love, say, the Jane Austen novels. And I think it has to do with the atmosphere of those books. Mm-hmm. Whereas Jane Austen's novels, like, there's no atmosphere really at all in her books. There's very little description in her books. Whereas with the Brontes, I mean, they're, you know, Thornfield Hall, and I mean, all of that stuff. The Bronte novels are just steeped in this really intense, heady description. And Rebecca, it doesn't do it as well, but it's the same kind of thing, right? It's almost like smoke. Like you're reading the novel and you feel like you're lost in smoke or in mist or something. And I think people just love that. You know, I think that they, I don't know, it's like being lost in a good book. You know, I think people love the feeling of being a little bit lost in something. So I don't know. So I would say it has probably most to do with that. That's a longer answer than your part.
Yeah. Well, no, but it's very interesting. I think you're right. Well, at least it rings true. It rings true. Is that a real phrase in the English language? Oh my God. I'm going to start singing the Mexican national anthem here. I personally really resonate with that sense of veneer, the atmosphere, the tone. That's why I cannot read Jane Austen. I cannot. I read Pride and Prejudice. I sort of read it. I sort of cheated my way through it, honestly. I wanted to slit my wrists. I hated the writing. I hated that there was no atmosphere. I really loved the dialogue. I thought it was very witty and quippy and, you know, very nice. Mm-hmm. But I know that's not a writing style for me. It's no, thank you. I agree. I think that Rebecca, maybe because it's her most popular work commercially, it's her biggest commercial success. I think that's why so many people have come to love it. I think if more people read some of her other more obscure works, although she's not really an obscure writer. You can get her books anywhere and everywhere. The last time that I was in London, I was really struck by how many Daphne du Maurier editions and copies they have in each bookstore. She's very, very commercially accessible. But maybe people just immediately go for Rebecca, maybe because it was so commercially successful back in its publication day, maybe because there's been not one but two movies adaptations, even though the second one is awful. So maybe that's why many people stay with Rebecca and they don't bother, or they don't try to dig deeper into her oeuvre. I really think that Daphne du Maurier polishes a lot of her writing flaws in some other later works. I think My Cousin Rachel is the direct comparison that I would. It's her work that it's different, but it has the same kind of. There's a house, there's a woman, there's some mystery, some seduction, but oh my God, My Cousin Rachel is so good. It's far superior to this. And yeah, so that sort of frustrates me a bit when people get so caught up in this book and they don't realize that there's many other works by this author that are worth trying.
Well, I will add My Cousin Rachel to my TBR. Yeah,
and they made a movie with
I think it's got Rachel Weisz in it.
Rachel Weisz, yeah.
Yeah, I love.
I think she's really good for that part. I think she's really right.
Yeah,
by the way, if you
she's
could,
a great actress.
If you could cast Rebecca, who would you choose?
That's a great question. Yeah, so let's both let's cast this thing together, and then we'll wrap up. Because I have no idea like how.
First, the director. We need a director.
To say this. Got a director for this thing. I would say living directors. I don't know, somebody. I mean, David Fincher's done some really kind of moody stuff in the past, but I'm not sure he'd be great with the atmosphere, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know who I'd want to direct it. But as far as the narrator goes, I think Saoirse Ronan could do a really good job as the young Mrs. De Winter. She has this kind of deer in headlights innocence about her in some roles, and she's about the right age for it as well. And as far as Maxim, it's got to be a man in his early to mid 40s, really dashing. He should be kind of larger and kind of strong, like it shouldn't be some little white.
Yeah, I was thinking
like McAvoy. Michael Fassbender, maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking of Henry Cavill.
Oh, he would be great. He would be really great. Yeah. Yeah,
I think he's too attractive. Maybe that would be the only problem, that he might be too attractive for this role. I don't know if he could play that kind of moody, sinister side.
Yeah, I think he could do it.
What about Mrs. Danvers? I think that's the
best. It's the best role. It's definitely the best part. Yeah, God, there's so many great performances by actresses in similar roles in movies. That I find myself kind of thinking of those performances rather than the actresses playing them. Yeah, it should be somebody who's really, really stern. There's something really stern and evil about about him.
Do you remember what was the name of the actress who played? Yeah, so I think I would choose, as a director, I would choose Paul Thomas Anderson.
Really?
Because Phantom Thread So the reason why I thought of this was because Phantom Thread, which is one of my favorite movies, probably.
Leslie Manville would be great.
What's her name? Leslie Manville.
Yes, she would be fabulous.
That's her.
Yeah. Yeah, I can totally see
Actually,
that.
Phantom
She should have
Thread
won an
kind of
Oscar
reminds
for
me of Rebecca. She should have, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, as good as Daniel Day-Lewis is in that film, she is the best performance. She gives the best performance in Phantom Thread. She is magnificent in that movie.
Don't you think that there's a similarity in Phantom Thread and Rebecca? I mean, the Leslie Manville character, the Daniel Day-Lewis character, and then the ingenue who comes to this household. There's something there.
Yeah.
Something there.
Yeah. No, I can see that. Yeah, that makes sense thinking about. I suppose it's just because I was initially struck when you said it, because I don't think of Phantom Thread when I think of Paul Thomas Anderson. That's like the last movie of his that comes to mind for me. But no, I think that you make a good point, a good case for him directing it. Yeah, and Leslie Manville, she would be perfect as Mrs. Danvers. Absolutely perfect in that part. Yeah, so Saoirse Ronan, Henry Cavill, and Leslie Manville. I think that would be a nice cast.
Which is very sad because I think who's the actress who plays her in the Netflix movie? I think it's Lily Evans.
Lily...
Is that her name?
No,
Lily Evans is from Harry
Lily
Potter.
James. It's Lily James, I think. Yeah,
it's Lily James. Yeah, Lily Evans is Harry Potter's mom. I think she was really well cast. I think she would have been a really great protagonist, but she was just dead. I mean, the whole movie was so dead. I don't know if it was the direction. I don't even know who directed that movie, but it was so the opposite of charming. It was so dead.
Yeah, that's a real shame when you've got source material that gives you a hell of a lot to work with in terms of mood and atmosphere and whatnot. There's really no excuse for it to fail to come to life on screen. But anyway. Well, my friend, this was fun. And we should do another one of these in the future, maybe with my cousin Rachel. Maybe I could actually give Maurier another shot with that book and we could watch the film together.
I would be so happy to continue here with some interesting debate. I love that many people are probably going to watch this video and they're going to feel something. They're going to feel emotions, if you know what I mean, because it's like you cannot really say anything critical of certain books, and I think Rebecca is so protected and so dearly beloved that we're going to see some interesting debate. So I love that. I think we should do this more often, all of us, because debate and critical thinking is what keeps us growing as readers and as people. So let's keep on criticizing everything. I love it.
Oh, nothing I like better than criticizing. There's nothing I like better than that. So, all right, my friend. Well, this was fun. I will talk to you on Voxer soon.
Great. Happy to see you. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Jason.
Me, Juan.
Adios.
Bye-bye. See you later. Adios.